it's how do we miss that? Sam Kahn brings up a couple of really good points, and then he, of course, gets a response from, what's his name over there? From Jonathan Katz. So we're going to cover the little back and forth. And then I got into it with Jonathan Katz because I made a suggestion about how we might want to handle this moderation. But Sam says, "Dear Substackers Against Nazis, your hearts are obviously in a good place, but please do consider one way or another the following. That number one, and this is my big thing, what's the mechanism of action for determining who's a Nazi? Is a Nazi a member of the Nazi Party? Is it someone who self-identifies as a Nazi? Someone who espouses some views that overlap with Nazism as assessed by others? Someone who isn't traditionally Nazi but is far right? What about people who have nothing to do with Nazism but are actively calling for the elimination of Jewish people or of a Jewish state or of a Palestinian state? Is there a Substack entity or committee that makes these decisions? How big is it? Who's on it? Would you be equally comfortable if the entity ended up being, for instance, an algorithm? Does this entity have jurisdiction over only Nazis or over others, let's say racists, misogynists, ultra-nationalists, science deniers, others with objectionable views, and if so, over which of these? All right? These are the kind of cans of worms this is going to open. How expensive is this committee then? And are you comfortable with its funds coming directly from support for writers? How does this committee or entity get its information? Is there like a tip jar and Substackers report on other Substackers? What's the appeals process if you're accused of objectionable speech or views? And if someone's
it'll be like Britain. You gotta if you see something, say something on the internet.
They say that in New York.
Rat out your people. Yes.
If someone's kicked off the platform, what's to stop them from a defamation suit against Substack? Wouldn't that make it easier for Substack to just not list any reason for kicking somebody off? If you're calling for moderation, please at least think through some of the ramifications of what you're calling for. And I keep saying slippery slope here. Michael Moore, M-O-H-R, wrote a response about why he signed the letter. And, it became a lot of, this is leftists that are doing this. And they're blaming leftists for being ridiculous. Right. So they're usually pretty vocal about it. Think Hitler was right. Like to talk about the superiority. Is it not? Okay. So he's trying to answer that. And then he's I guess, reporting this post or what you can do. Right. But we found out what happens when you report. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But Jonathan then responds and says, it's hard to believe that people don't know this, but okay. There's this thing called Substack Trust and Safety. They already make moderation decisions and have for years. I assume their salaries are paid out of the 10% cut they take from our revenue, plus the money they get from investors. It's a thing that basically every social network in the world has. So for speaking for Jonathan, but our primary ask is not for anyone to be kicked off. It's for Substack Corporate to come out and discuss publicly why they go out of their way to promote writers who espouse white nationalist views, allow Nazis to monetize their newsletters, and yes, allow posts that seem to be in blatant violation of the TOS against hate. Stuff like this. So he put up a collective of stuff. Yeah. He blocks out and blurs out most of the names, although he doesn't blur this one out, and he doesn't blur another one of them out, I noticed. And this one, by the way, if Bin Laden didn't do 9/11, then who did? Joe published a video very similar to something like that that was factual. That literally did a deep dive into exactly the influence of 9/11. Like, yes.
Oh, Bin Laden didn't do 9/11.
Right. Then who did? And guess and it's saying the U.S. and Israel did. Well, guess what? There's a lot of people that have evidence to prove that. Nobody wants to hear that.
Yes, and JFK, but don't go too far down that rabbit hole.
Now,
we don't have enough tinfoil for our hats.
Correct. Now, Sam responds to Jonathan's hysteria because Jonathan likes to run around with his hair on fire. Jonathan, thank you for the reply. Here are a few of the many problems with your piece. Number one, you really misrepresent Substack's terms of use, and I'm very surprised that you got past the Atlantic. The terms of use for hate are to prohibit speech that incites violence based on protected classes, a narrow standard in line with current First Amendment jurisprudence. You claim that the terms of use formally proscribe hate, which is a far broader reading and is your own concoction. What else is new? He pulled it out of his own ass. Number 2, under the actual terms of use, very few of the newsletters that you so assiduously scoured through would be in violation of the content guidelines. I'm fully with you on the noxiousness of the Great Replacement theory or the history of World War II from a pro-Nazi perspective, but in looking through the Substacks you identified, I didn't come across explicit calls for violence or for segregation, which is the threshold for proscribing speech. Your argument is that Substack is condoning blatant violation of the TOS, wears very thin. Actually, it seems that the only complaints have to do with Substack leadership are Hamish McKenzie hosting Richard Hanania on the Active Voice and McKenzie recommending Daryl Cooper. But, as you note, Hanania's appearance was before outing the white supremacists. Was before his outing for the white. Okay, let me back up. As you know, Hanania's appearance. Hanania's appearance was before his outing for the white nationalist pieces. And when he was a widely published and discussed figure, not for being a white nationalist. For being an asshole, yes, for being a Republican.
Motherfucker, do you speak it?
The issue with Cooper was for interviewing a white nationalist as part of a planned series on extremism. Like I said, in other words, for doing something that journalists do all the time. You can certainly argue that McKenzie should have invited a different guest or recommended a different podcaster, but that's very far from your claim that Substack has a pattern of promoting Nazi shitheels. They have more of a pattern of promoting neo-lib shitheels. Number 4 is that it's completely incoherent from your writing and statements to what the proposed remedy is. You say that you would like Substack's leadership to come out in the open and talk publicly about their policy. But they've already been crystal clear about it. It's free speech with hands-off moderation for views or beliefs. Then you say that we are not, as lazy rumors have it, trying to deplatform Substack contributors we don't like, but you are calling for the demonetization of objectionable newsletters, which is a kind of shadow ban. It would certainly serve as a form of punishment for noxious speech and would diverge from Substack's current terms of use. In the article, you explicitly back away from a ban, but then if Substack were to follow all your other recommendations, wouldn't they still, as you might put it, be left with a Nazi problem? I think, as we both know, the only way to really make Substack free of any sort of Nazi or far-right content is a change in the terms of use, proscribing certain types of expression, and a shift to a far more robust inquisitorial content moderation. That would make for a very different platform with very different values, and would, I'd argue, be an extreme overreaction to the 16 or so newsletters you found and a regrettable podcast invitation. Yeah. I would say so.
Yep.
This idea that you're just a concerned Substack citizen looking for clarity from the founders is really disingenuous. If that's the case, you're supposed to identify a clear call for action and trace your inability to get the leadership to agree to the proposed remedy before you write for a publication that clearly bears Substack no goodwill, like The Atlantic. I do find it curious that you appoint yourself an arbiter of online civility when you respond to somebody who critiques you by calling them a loser, a douchebag, and old. And is 53 really so old? I hope not. You have caused real
old person.
This is what bothers me the most. That Jonathan, you have caused real and possibly permanent damage to a platform that a lot of people here care about and that is fundamentally operating from a good place. When people Google Substack now, Nazi will come right up in their search results. Okay? That's something that Andon's right press never succeeded in doing, but you did. And your bosses at The Atlantic wanted done in the first place. And I said that here, the last one is the agenda of his bosses. He can cry and moan that he's not serving an agenda, but he's either lying through his teeth or genuinely stupid.